My parents forced me to raise my sister's kids while I worked overtime to survive, so I moved away silently, and now they are desperate. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my parents treated me like the family's built-in safety net. It sounds dramatic when I say it out loud, but it's the truth. Some kids grow up with birthday parties, toys, and carefree afternoons. I grew up with bills on the kitchen table, my dad saying, "You're the man of the house now," and my mom reminding me that family comes first, always. I wasn't even out of high school when those words became chains around my neck. I started working at 17, taking every shift my manager would hand me because my parents insisted we were barely surviving. Meanwhile, my older sister, Melissa, the so-called future of the family, floated through life like consequences didn't exist. She was always out, partying, dating, disappearing for weekends. And whenever I asked why she didn't have to carry any weight, Mom would snap, "She's figuring herself out." "Stop comparing." Dad would chime in with, "You're the responsible one. Be proud of it." As if responsibility was supposed to feel like suffocation. The worst part? Back then, I actually believed them. I thought paying bills, buying groceries, and covering gaps in rent made me a good son. I thought it meant I was useful, needed, valuable. But the older I got, the more I realized no one said thank you. No one even acknowledged the sacrifices I made. It wasn't admiration, it was expectation. And expectations can crush you when you're too young to understand you're being used. I remember noticing the cracks early on, tiny moments when resentment curled inside my chest. Moments when I wondered why Melissa got praised for existing while I got lectured for being tired. But I swallowed it all, like I always did. Then one night, Melissa came home pale and shaking, mumbling something about being late and not ready. The moment she said she might be pregnant, my parents exchanged a look, wide-eyed, terrified, calculating. And for some reason, that look still haunts me. It was the first sign that everything in my life was about to get so much worse. When Melissa's pregnancy was confirmed, everything in the house shifted, but not in the way you'd expect. You'd think a family would come together, make a plan, maybe help Melissa figure out her life. Instead, my parents turned to me, like I was the father, the solution, the only adult in the room. I was 19 at the time, barely making minimum wage, but my mom said, "We all have to support Melissa right now." And somehow we all meant me doing everything. The first few months after the baby was born were chaos wrapped in denial. Melissa barely helped. She'd shove the crying baby into my arms and say, "I need a nap," then disappear for hours. When I tried to hand the baby back, Mom would block me with a cold stare and say, "She's overwhelmed. Don't make it harder." Dad added his classic guilt trip. "You know she's not strong like you." It felt like I'd been drafted into parenthood without consent. I'd come home after closing shifts, shirt stained, feet aching, brain buzzing, only to hear my mom call out, "He's back. Hand him the baby." I remember one night holding the screaming infant at 2 a.m., pacing the hallway while Melissa's music thumped from her room. I whispered to the baby, "I'm not supposed to be doing this," but those words only made my chest tighter. I kept asking myself, why is this my responsibility? Why does no one care about my exhaustion? Every time I tried to set boundaries, my parents acted like I'd committed treason. Family helps family, they'd chant, but the truth was only I was helping. The emotional cracks widened fast. I began noticing how easily my parents dismissed my feelings, how quickly they defended Melissa. It wasn't just favoritism, it was entitlement, weaponized. And just when I thought I'd reached my limit, I overheard Melissa laughing with her friend one night, saying, "At least I don't have to deal with the baby. My brother's basically the dad anyway." Something in me froze when I heard that I didn't realize it then. But that was the first step toward losing my entire identity to their manipulation. By the time Melissa had her second child, I felt like I'd been living someone else's life for years. I was only in my early 20s, but my days revolved around diapers, feedings, school runs, sleepless nights, and whatever overtime I could grab just to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, Melissa reincarnated herself as a single young woman finding her joy, posting selfies at bars and beaches while I scrubbed baby bottles at midnight. Whenever I confronted her, she'd shrug and say, "You're good with kids. I'm not built for this." As if parenthood was a personality trait she simply didn't unlock. My parents only made things worse. Dad started introducing me to relatives as the one keeping this family together, with a proud laugh that felt more like a chain tightening around my throat. Mom would tell neighbors, "He's basically a second father to the little ones," while I stood there wondering how on earth I became the father to children I didn't create. Every time I tried correcting the narrative, Mom would pinch my arm and whisper, "Don't embarrass your sister." Their gaslighting was so casual it felt practiced. The financial strain was unbearable. My overtime money vanished into the household like water poured into sand. "Groceries are expensive," Mom would say. "Formula costs a lot," Dad would add. Yet I'd see bags of Melissa's shopping on the counter. New clothes, hair products, random junk she never needed. Whenever I questioned it, the response was predictable. "She's stressed. Let her breathe." But the moment that broke me was when a neighbor pulled me aside and said, "You're such a devoted dad. Those kids are lucky to have you." I stood there frozen, the world suddenly tilting. Dad. I wasn't their dad. I wasn't even a willing participant. It hit me in a wave. My parents had been rewriting the story behind my back, painting me as the guardian, the responsible adult, the man holding the family together. And if they could rewrite the story so easily, I feared what else they were willing to rewrite next. I didn't find out about the identity fraud in some dramatic TV moment. It started with a single envelope, plain, official-looking, addressed to me, sitting on the kitchen table. Mom brushed past it casually, saying, "Probably junk," but something in her tone made my stomach twist. When I opened it, the room seemed to tilt. It was a notice about inconsistencies in childcare benefits associated with my account. My account. I didn't have any benefits. I didn't even have kids. I remember my voice cracking when I asked, "What is this?" Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Oh, that. We handled it," he said, like forged federal documents were no big deal. When I pressed him, Mom snapped, "Don't start drama. We only used your name because Melissa needed help. You're young. You'll be fine." Those words, "We only used your name," landed like a punch to the ribs. I ran to my room, grabbed my documents, and spread everything across my bed. My hands shook as I compared signatures. They weren't mine. Not even close. Applications for childcare assistance, medical forms, emergency contact sheets, all filed under my identity. My chest tightened so fast I couldn't breathe. When I confronted them, my voice wasn't even angry. It was small. "You committed fraud in my name. I could go to jail." But Melissa laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Relax. No one checks this stuff. You're being dramatic." Dad added, "You're part of this family. Act like it." Something inside me cracked so loud I swear the whole room felt it. I realized then they didn't just see me as responsible. They saw me as disposable. A tool. A name they could sign away. A life they could sacrifice without hesitation. And the worst part, if they'd already crossed this line, what else were they willing to do? That fear settled deep in my stomach, and it stayed there. I should have known the night Melissa gathered us in the living room that nothing good was coming. She had that look. Restless, excited. The same expression she wore every time she was about to abandon responsibility again. "So, I'm moving," she said, twirling her hair like she was announcing a vacation instead of detonating a bomb. My parents went pale, but not for the reason you'd expect. Mom whispered, "What about the kids?" And Melissa just shrugged. "He can handle them. He already does." The words hit me so hard I thought I misheard. "What?" I choked out. She rolled her eyes. "Don't act confused. You're basically the father. And I can't live my life stuck in this house with babies." My dad stepped between us and said, "Your sister needs a fresh start. Support her. Support her. Again. Always. No matter the cost to me." I tried to argue. Tried to explain I was drowning. Financially, physically, emotionally. "I can't raise these kids," I said, voice shaking. But Mom snapped back. "Yes, you can. You're already doing it. Stop being dramatic." Melissa shrugged on her jacket and said, "I'll send money when I can," which we all knew meant never. But the real twist came hours later when the kids' school called asking me to confirm my guardian information. I froze. "Guardian?" The administrator calmly said, "You're listed as their legal guardian on school records. We just need to update your contact details." My parents had forged more than benefits. They'd forged custody. My name, my signature, everywhere. I confronted them that night, shaking with disbelief. Mom didn't deny it. "We had to," she said. "It was the only way to keep the kids enrolled." Dad added, "You're the stable one." It made sense. That was the moment everything shifted. Not only was I doing the work of a parent, legally, they had already made me one. And Melissa? She was already gone. When Melissa disappeared, the house fell into a kind of chaos that only I was expected to fix. Overnight, I became the default parent, the financial provider, the emotional support, the emergency contact, the one who woke up at 5 a.m. for school drop-offs after barely sleeping 2 hours. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning, pouring cereal for the kids with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My mom brushed past me and said, "You look tired," but it wasn't concern. It was an accusation. Like fatigue was a flaw. Work became a battlefield. I begged my supervisor for flexible hours, but after the third time I left early because the school called, he pulled me aside and said, "You need to get your life together, man. We can't keep covering for you." I wanted to scream, "They are not my kids," but the forged guardianship made that feel like a lie. My life wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to paperwork I never signed. I started losing weight without trying. Some nights, I'd collapse on the living room couch with a fever, only to be jolted awake by a crying toddler shoved into my arms. Mom would say, "He needs you." Like I wasn't sick, like I wasn't breaking. Every boundary I tried to set was bulldozed with guilt. Family sacrifices, Dad reminded me. Stop being selfish. Selfish. That word haunted me. Selfish for wanting to sleep. Selfish for wanting a life. Selfish for not wanting to raise children who weren't mine. The lowest moment, the moment everything inside me shattered, came when I got my final warning at work. My supervisor sighed and said, "One more absence and you're done." Then he added quietly, "You're too young to look this beaten." That night, I sat on the bathroom floor, the house silent, my head in my hands, my chest so tight I thought I was dying. I stared at my reflection, hollow eyes, shaking hands, and whispered, "I can't do this anymore." But the worst part? I knew my parents wouldn't care, not even if I broke completely. My breaking point didn't come with a shout or an explosion. It came with silence. One morning, after another sleepless night, I stood over the kitchen sink watching cold water run over my hands, and I felt nothing. No anger, no fear, no guilt, just emptiness. That was the moment I realized staying would kill me slowly, and no one in that house would stop it. So I did something I never imagined doing. I searched legal help for forged guardianship on my phone. Sitting across from the lawyer that afternoon felt surreal. I explained everything, from the forged signatures to the benefit applications to Melissa's disappearance. And each time I paused, waiting for disbelief or judgment, the lawyer just nodded. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You need to understand something. If you stay in this situation, you are building a case against yourself. You must distance yourself immediately." The words hit like an earthquake. Distance yourself. Not fix it, not talk to them, not be patient. Distance. Now, he laid out the steps. Gather evidence. Stop providing care as much as possible. Document everything. And prepare to file for removal of guardianship. If they forged paperwork once, he added, they'll do it again. I remember swallowing hard because deep down, I already knew he was right. After that meeting, something inside me shifted. I went home and began observing everything through a different lens. Less like a trapped son and more like a man preparing to escape a collapsing building. I copied documents, scanned signatures, saved messages. I started saying no more often, claiming exhaustion or work, and although my parents snapped at me, I didn't cave the way I used to. Melissa returned briefly, dropping off bags of laundry and complaining about her boyfriend, but I barely responded. She frowned and said, "You're acting weird." And for once, I didn't explain myself. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to their needs, that I was planning something quietly, deliberately, a way out. And even though I didn't know exactly how yet, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't survive much longer if I stayed. The hardest part about planning my escape wasn't the logistics. It was pretending everything was normal while quietly dismantling the life my parents had built around me. Every morning, I'd wake up before everyone else, not to pack lunches or fold laundry, but to transfer a few things into a duffel bag hidden in my car. A pair of jeans, important documents, a childhood photo I couldn't leave behind. I'd zip the bag up, walk back into the house, and force myself into the same routine they expected, pretending I wasn't counting down the days. The first major step was opening a new bank account. I did it on a lunch break, hands sweating as I filled out the forms. When my next paycheck hit, I rerouted the direct deposit, cutting off the shared household account my parents loved to drain. That same night, Mom frowned at the empty account and said, "The paycheck's late. Did you mess something up?" I shrugged and said, "Must be a bank delay." Inside, my heart pounded, but she didn't question it further. She never believed I'd do anything without her knowing. I rented a tiny studio apartment 40 miles away, a place so small the bed practically touched the kitchenette. But when I unlocked it for the first time, something washed over me. Freedom, maybe, or the distant memory of having a life that belonged only to me. I cleaned it, bought a cheap mattress, and kept the lights off to avoid attracting attention from neighbors who might ask questions. Every night at home, I became quieter, more distant. The kids noticed first. One evening, the older one tugged my sleeve and said, "Why don't you smile anymore?" His innocent voice stabbed at me, but I gently told him I was just tired. The truth was heavier. I couldn't let guilt anchor me here anymore. Still, the facade had to stay intact. If my parents suspected even a hint of rebellion, they'd tighten their grip. They always did. So I collected evidence, moved belongings, rerouted money, and walked through the house like a ghost. Because soon, I wouldn't be living there at all. The morning I left, the house was unnervingly quiet. No crying toddlers. No Melissa barging in at dawn looking for her hair straightener. No parents arguing in the kitchen. Just the hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stood in the doorway of my room, bare mattress, empty shelves, the indent on the carpet where my dresser used to sit, and whispered a soft goodbye to a version of myself I was finally done burying. Then I picked up my backpack, walked out, and closed the door behind me without looking back. I drove away before the sun even rose, the sky still bruised with shades of gray and blue. For the first few miles, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting my dad's truck to follow me like some twisted chase scene. But the road stayed empty. The silence inside the car felt surreal, almost deafening. I gripped the steering wheel harder, just to remind myself I was real, that this was real. By 9 a.m., the call started. At first, it was Mom. "Where are you? Why isn't the baby fed? Why is your room empty?" Her voice went from confused to furious in seconds. Then Dad, "You better get back here right now." When I didn't answer, he sent a text, just one sentence dripping with rage. "You have responsibilities." But the one that broke me, though I refused to let myself cry, came from Melissa. 10 missed calls. 3 voicemails. The first was annoyed. The second panicked. The third, she was sobbing, her voice cracking as she said, "I can't do this alone. Please don't do this to me. They said you'd never leave." Them. That word hit like a punch. My parents had told her I'd never leave. That I was permanent. Their safety net. Their free labor. Their built-in guardian. But I sat in my tiny new apartment hours later. Bare walls, cheap mattress on the floor, and for the first time in my life, I felt peace. Heavy, quiet, unfamiliar peace. The final shock came that evening when my lawyer called. His voice was calm, almost celebratory. The guardianship reversal was approved. You're officially disconnected from all legal responsibility. I froze at a weight I'd carried for years finally slipped off my shoulders. But I knew my family's reaction. That storm hadn't even begun yet. The silence after the guardianship reversal lasted only a day. Then the real chaos began, loud, frantic, and desperate. The first message came from my mother. The benefits office called. They canceled everything. "What did you do?" But I didn't answer. I stared at the screen, realizing she wasn't asking because she cared about me. She was asking because the money stopped. Because the system no longer saw me as the parent they forged me to be. By the end of the week, their world was unraveling. The school contacted them for once, informing my parents that without a legal guardian on file, the kids could no longer stay enrolled. Social services opened a case when Melissa tried dropping the kids off with my parents full-time again. She apparently told the investigator, "My brother raised them before, he'll come back." Hearing that made something cold settle in my chest. Even after everything, she believed I'd return on command. Then Dad called. Not yelling this time, something worse. His voice trembled with real fear. "We're being investigated. They said there were forged documents. They want to speak with you." I felt a sharp sting of satisfaction, but also a deep ache. "Talk to your lawyer," I replied flatly, and hung up. It was the first time in my life I didn't explain myself to him. The first time I didn't justify my choice to breathe on my own terms. Word spread fast through the family. My aunt texted me. I had no idea you were supporting them like that. Your parents made it sound like you volunteered. Others messaged stories, lies my parents had told for years. That I loved being involved. That I was protective of the kids. That I wanted to step in. Every message felt like peeling back the wallpaper on a room to find mold underneath. They'd rewritten my life so convincingly that even extended relatives believed the fantasy. The final blow came when Melissa's boyfriend kicked her out, and she moved back home, this time with no escape route and no one to dump the responsibility on. She left a message, voice hoarse, saying, "They're saying you ruined everything. Please just talk to them." But listening to her voice didn't make me waver. If anything, it made the truth clearer than ever. Without me, the structure they'd built on my back was finally collapsing, and I knew the confrontation I'd been avoiding was coming soon. I didn't plan to confront them. I honestly thought I'd never see that house again. But I needed a few old documents for my new job, and my lawyer insisted I retrieve the originals. So after months of distance, I parked outside the house I once kept alive, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The windows were dark, the paint chipping, the yard unkempt. Like neglect had finally settled in now that I wasn't there to pick up the slack. I took a deep breath and stepped out. The moment I walked through the door, both of my parents were standing in the living room, as if they'd been waiting. Mom's eyes were red, her voice trembling. "We need to talk," she whispered. Dad added, "You can't keep avoiding us. This family is falling apart." But there was something in their tone I'd never heard before. Not anger, not authority, fear. Real, raw fear. I set my bag down and said quietly, "Say what you need to say." Mom's voice broke. "We need you back. The kids. Melissa, everything is out of control. We can't do this without you." She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Dad's jaw tightened with panic. "You're being cruel," he said. "We're your family." For the first time in my life, I didn't crumble. Instead, I pulled out the folder from my bag, copies of every forged document, each signature that wasn't mine, each lie they'd built their survival on. I laid them on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is what you did to me." Mom covered her mouth. Dad's face went chalk white. Melissa hovered in the hallway, eyes wide, clutching one of the kids' toys like a shield. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just explained everything. How the fraud almost ruined me. How the forged guardianship nearly cost me my job. How years of emotional abuse left me drowning. Every word was a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. When I finished, Mom whispered, "We didn't mean to hurt you." And I said the sentence that finally broke the spell. "You didn't care if you did." Dad exhaled shakily. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," I replied. "Not anymore." Their faces collapsed. Fear, guilt, disbelief all tangled together. And as I turned toward the door, the only thing I felt was the lightness of finally walking away. But I also knew the real freedom wouldn't come until I ended things my way completely. Walking out of that house felt like stepping out of a burning building I'd lived in my whole life. The air outside tasted different, cleaner, lighter, almost unfamiliar after years of breathing in guilt and obligation. I got into my car, closed the door, and just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, letting the reality sink in. They had no more power, no more leverage, no more access to my life. And for the first time, the peace I felt wasn't followed by anxiety, it just stayed. The next months were quiet, really quiet. I went to work, came home to my tiny, uncluttered apartment, cooked what I wanted, slept when I wanted, woke up without a screaming toddler or a parent banging on my door. At first, the silence felt wrong, like I was breaking a rule or betraying someone. But slowly, I realized the only person I had ever betrayed was myself. Every night, I stretched out on my small mattress and thought, "This is mine, my space, my life." And that thought alone healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Melissa eventually started messaging me, not with excuses at first, but with apologies. Real ones. She admitted she wasn't ready for motherhood, that she took advantage of me because she thought I'd never push back. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I didn't understand what I was doing to you." I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because forgiveness is not the same as returning to the place that damaged you. My silence wasn't revenge. It was recovery. My parents tried too. They asked to meet, to talk things out, but every message sounded like someone trying to regain what they lost, not someone trying to change. I stayed distant. I stayed firm. I stayed free. One evening, months later, I stood in my apartment watching the sunset paint the walls gold. And for the first time, I said out loud, I survived. Not the kids, not the responsibilities, not the guilt, not the emotional manipulation disguised as family. I survived. And the best part, my future finally belongs to me, and no one else.